Why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Why it backfired. What happens when a rising empire runs out of fuel, picks a fight with the world's biggest oil supplier, and bets everything on a surprise attack halfway across the Pacific? Why did Japan, armed with ambition, torpedoes, and a dangerously empty gas tank, decide to wake up the one country with more steel, oil, and industrial rage than the rest of the planet combined? How did a quiet Sunday morning in Hawaii turn into a firestorm of bombs, battleships, and history's most infamous wake-up call? And what was Japan really thinking when they said, "Let's hit Pearl Harbor, cripple the US fleet, and hope they'll just negotiate"? This is not just a war story. It's a tale of empire dreams and resource nightmares, of strategic blunders and diplomatic dead ends, of torpedoes in paradise and mushroom clouds on the horizon. From the icy borders of Siberia to the tropical chaos of Southeast Asia, from oil embargoes to the USS Arizona's final breath, we'll unravel every twist, every miscalculation, and every explosive moment that led to the day the sleeping giant woke up and brought hell with him. So if you've ever asked, why did Japan attack Pearl Harbor? What pushed America from isolation to all-out war? How did oil, ambition, and arrogance ignite the Pacific? Then buckle up, because this story is packed with drama, intrigue, and the kind of historical twists that make you say, wait, they did what? Subscribe now, hit that bell, and stay tuned, because this is the kind of history that doesn't just inform, it explodes. In the early 20th century, Japan was like the overachieving kid in class, modernizing rapidly, building a navy that could make Poseidon jealous, and dreaming of an empire to rival Britain's. But there was one tiny problem. Japan had the ambition of a global superpower and the natural resources of a rock garden. Oil, coal, iron, Japan had barely any of it. So they looked to China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific for expansion. In 1931, they invaded Manchuria, setting up a puppet state called Manchukuo. It was like saying, we're not invading, we're just redecorating. By 1937, Japan was deep into the Second Sino-Japanese War, battling China and committing horrific atrocities like the rape of Nanking, which made the world recoil in horror. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the US was in full leave-me-alone mode. After WWI, Americans were done with foreign entanglements. Congress passed neutrality acts in the 1930s like a teenager slamming their bedroom door. But as Japan bombed Chinese cities and Hitler threw Europe into chaos, public opinion began to shift. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, ever the chess player, began nudging America toward involvement. 1939, a new Neutrality Act allowed arms sales to Britain and France. 1941, the Lend-Lease Act let the U.S. supply weapons to allies, including China and the Soviet Union, without asking for payment. Japan saw this and thought, wait a minute, they're not neutral at all. Picture Japan in the 1930s, a rising industrial power with dreams of empire, swaggering around like it was the new kid on the imperial block. But beneath the polished boots and naval bravado was a dirty little secret. Japan had almost no oil of its own. By 1939, Japan imported 94% of its oil, and a whopping 80% of that came from the United States. Without oil, Japan's military was like a samurai with a butter knife. Impressive, but not exactly effective. And it wasn't just oil. Japan also depended on the US for scrap metal, iron, steel, and copper, the industrial equivalent of oxygen. So Japan was essentially building an empire on borrowed fuel. It was like trying to conquer the world with a gas tank that constantly read E. Faced with this resource crisis, Japan had two strategic options. The Northern Strategy, Hokushin-ron, backed by the Imperial Japanese Army. Target Manchuria, Mongolia, and Siberia, rich in coal, iron, and maybe oil. Problem: the Soviets weren't exactly keen on sharing. In 1939, Japan tried to flex its muscles at the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, a border clash with Soviet and Mongolian forces. Spoiler alert, it went terribly. Soviet General Georgy Zhukov unleashed a blitzkrieg of tanks and artillery. Japan got walloped so hard they abandoned the Northern Strategy altogether. The Southern Strategy, Nanshin-ron, championed by the Imperial Japanese Navy. Target: British Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, and French Indochina, a tropical buffet of oil, rubber, and tin. Bonus: these colonies were guarded by Western powers distracted by Hitler. After Khalkhin Gol, Japan pivoted south like a dancer changing partners mid-performance. Japan's southern moves didn't go unnoticed. In 1940, Japan occupied northern French Indochina to cut off Chinese supply lines. The U.S. responded with embargoes on iron, steel, and aviation fuel, termination of the 1911 Commercial Treaty, a diplomatic side-eye so intense it could melt steel. Then in July 1941, Japan doubled down and occupied all of Indochina. That was the last straw. President Roosevelt froze all Japanese assets in the U.S., imposed a full oil embargo, cutting off 94% of Japan's supply. Britain and the Netherlands joined in, slamming the door on Japan's oil imports. Japan was now in a full-blown crisis. Their oil reserves would last 6 months, barely enough time to finish a war, let alone start one. Japan tried to negotiate. They sent Admiral Kichisaburo Nomura to Washington with a smile and a suitcase full of polite requests. The U.S. said, "Sure, we'll lift the embargo if you leave China. Ditch your alliance with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. Stop acting like you own Southeast Asia." Japan's response? So, war it is. Japan knew that invading Southeast Asia would provoke the U.S., so they decided to go full ninja and strike first. The plan? Cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, buy time to seize oil-rich territories and dig in. The hope? America would be so stunned they'd negotiate peace. On November 26, 1941, a Japanese task force, led by Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, set sail from Hitokapu Bay. The fleet included 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, and hundreds of aircraft. Their destination, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Their mission, shock and awe. They arrived undetected, 230 miles north of Oahu. It was a Sunday. The kind of morning where sailors were ironing their whites, chaplains were setting up chairs for church, and cooks were flipping pancakes in the mess hall. The U.S. Pacific Fleet was anchored at Pearl Harbor, nestled in the tropical embrace of Oahu, Hawaii. The battleships were lined up neatly on Battleship Row, like ducks in a shooting gallery. Meanwhile, 230 miles north of the island, a Japanese task force led by Admiral Chuichi Nagumo was preparing to unleash hell. 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, and over 350 aircraft were locked and loaded. Their mission? Shock and awe. The first wave of 183 Japanese aircraft appeared like angry hornets over the harbor. The Americans were caught completely off guard. No radar alerts, no fighter intercepts, just the sound of engines and the scream of bombs. The attack was split into 3 groups. Dive bombers and fighters targeted the airfields, Hickam, Wheeler, and Bellows, where U.S. planes were parked wingtip to prevent sabotage. Ironically, this made them perfect targets. Torpedo bombers went after the battleships. The Americans thought the harbor was too shallow for torpedoes. The Japanese said, "Hold our psyche," and unveiled a new torpedo design that worked like a charm. High-level bombers dropped armor-piercing bombs with terrifying precision. At 8:06 a.m., a bomb pierced the forward deck of the USS Arizona, igniting a magazine full of gunpowder. The explosion was so violent it lifted the battleship out of the water. In a matter of minutes, 1,177 crew members were killed. The Arizona sank, and with it, half the total American deaths that day. Today, it still lies beneath the harbor, leaking oil, known as the Black Tears, a haunting memorial to the lives lost. Another 170 aircraft swooped in, targeting the same locations. But now the base was on high alert. Anti-aircraft guns were firing, smoke filled the air, and chaos reigned. The second wave was less effective, but still devastating. By the end of the attack, 2,403 Americans were dead, including sailors, Marines, soldiers, and civilians. 1,178 were wounded. 8 battleships were damaged or sunk. 188 aircraft were destroyed. And yet, the 3 U.S. aircraft carriers, the real backbone of naval warfare, were not in port. That would prove critical. Japan's plan was built on one big assumption, that the U.S. would be so crippled and demoralized it would negotiate peace. So they focused on battleships, not fuel depots, repair yards, or submarine pens. The shallow harbor meant many ships could be salvaged and repaired. The untouched infrastructure allowed the U.S. Greta to bounce back fast. And the carriers? They would go on to win the war. Pearl Harbor was just the opening act. On the same day, Japan launched coordinated attacks across the Pacific. Guam, Wake Island, the Philippines, all U.S. territories. Malaya, Hong Kong, Singapore, British colonies. Thailand surrendered within hours and joined the Axis. 2 major British warships, HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse, were sunk off Malaya. Japan was blitzing through Southeast Asia like a kid in a candy store. By early 1942, they had the empire and the oil they'd long craved. The next day, President Roosevelt addressed Congress. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Congress declared war. Isolationism evaporated. The U.S. mobilized like never before. Factories roared to life, producing tanks, planes, and ships. Millions enlisted. The economy shifted to total war footing. Japan had hoped for a short war. Instead, they got the full fury of American industrial might. Pearl Harbor was a tactical success, but a strategic disaster for Japan. They wanted oil, empire, and peace on their terms. What they got was a global war, a relentless enemy, and eventually atomic fire raining down on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The attack on Pearl Harbor didn't just change the war, it changed the world. Up next, the sleeping giant roared back. Imagine this. You punch a bear in the nose while it's napping. Not smart, right? Well, on December 7, 1941, Japan did just that, and America didn't just wake up. It stood up, geared up, and lit up the sky with a vengeance that would reshape history. Coming up next, the American response, a tale of industrial fury, battlefield grit, and the ultimate crescendo, atomic fire raining down on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's not just war, it's a seismic shift in global power, morality, and the very definition of devastation. From the assembly lines of Detroit to the mushroom clouds over Japan, this is the story of how a nation turned heartbreak into horsepower and changed the world forever. So if you've got goosebumps now, just wait, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and stay locked in, because history's about to go nuclear. And trust me, you do not want to miss this blast.